Good morning, everybody.
Hey, good morning.
Morning. Morning.
So, really happy to have some of our readers and WomenED community members join us for this book club chat today, where we are talking all about Disruptive Women. So, the third published book under the WomenED title, A WomenED Guide to Equitable Action in Education, which I think we won't talk too much about politics, but I definitely think it's going to be a disruptive enabler for us with what's going on in the world at the moment. I'm going to just quickly ask the ladies that have joined today's book club chat to introduce themselves and share as much as they would like to, or as little as they'd like to as well. So, Virginia, can I start with you, please?
Yes, of course. So, Virginia Hitchcock, call me Ginny, whichever is easiest for you. So, I'm in the unique position that I'm not a teacher, but thank you, recognised as part of the woman-led community. And how I got to that place is that I left a career in technology in the financial services probably 2 years ago. And I decided I really wanted to lean in more to my personal side of things and how I can support individuals, give, especially women, given the background that I worked in technology. And Women and Ed have embraced me and held and heard me in my first entry into social media maybe 12 months ago. I'm so proud to be a part of the community. And I think what I found with them is the things that they raise and the issues that they raise, while some of them are specific to teaching, there's a message there across all professions. And my passion ultimately is trying to bring together some of these professions together so we can break down those barriers using some of the great ideas we got and get to where we need to be even quicker.
Thank you, Ginny. That's brilliant. Emma?
That's a lot to follow. So hi, I'm Emma. I am a head of maths in a sort of North London school. I sort of first heard about Women Ed 3 years ago or so when I had just been offered the post and I was given the 10% Braver book as a book to kind of help me get ready for that post by a female colleague. And I feel throughout my career, I've been lucky I've had female colleagues at the right time push me to take that next step and be that bit braver and apply for the job that I didn't think I was ready for. And I feel like I'm starting to get to the point where I kind of know what I'm doing as a middle leader. I'm looking at senior leadership maybe in the next few years. And I feel like this book has come around at the right time for me when I'm starting to think about actually supporting other people into those leadership positions and being their guides. Additionally, I have really benefited this year. I have a 5.5-month-old at home. You'll probably hear in the background at some point. And I've really benefited this year from some flexible working to help me with returning to work and kind of continuing to be present for him, but also kind of still being a leader in the school I'm in.
Brilliant. Thank you, Emma. And Vivian?
Hello, I'm Vivian Porritt. I'm one of the co-founders and one of the global strategic leaders of WomenED and therefore a trustee of the charity. So WomenED is a global charity now. I'm also in the delighted position to be one of the three editors of Disruptive Women. And I'm very, very proud that I've been part of the editing team for all three of WomenED's books. So I feel I'm in a position to think through the development of what we've added there. So yes, 10% Braver was about sharing the knowledge, our first book, of what was really happening to women in education. I'd been a head teacher of a secondary school and I didn't know any of that at all till we started exploring in WomenED. The second book was the stories of women being 10% braver and why they had to do that and the difference that made for them and the advice they wanted to share with others. And Disruptive Women is our most angry book. We are 10 years old in May 2025. And in some ways, we shouldn't still be here. We should have, all of us together, got it all sorted. But in many ways, it feels like it's still going backwards for all women and isn't moving forward enough for women in education. So the 30 chapter authors and case studies in the book are very clear on the need for disruption. And maybe part of our discussion today could be exactly what disruptive women actually means in that way. And what do we mean by disrupting the status quo for women leaders and women educators, all women in education?
Thank you, Vivian. That's a really good place to start in the sense of, yeah, what do we mean by disruption? And I think I think we are going to bring in context. I think it's really important too, because thinking about the landscape as it is, disagree with me absolutely if you want to, but I do believe like we're existing within a legacy of capitalism and patriarchy still, in the sense of that you still have, and it's a generational thing where you have certain types of men because of how they've been enabled by the systems that are there to get to where they need to be and therefore hold the power still. And I was thinking quite deeply the other weekend about, we won't talk, but I think people will read between the lines of what we're talking about. That there almost seems to be like there are glass ceilings still, there are concrete ceilings still. And I think if you look across the world in terms of like what's going on with Afghanistan, so my part will always be there. There are women that aren't allowed to speak to each other, never mind girls going into education. We still don't have a female president in the US, and that's happened twice now by the same person, which I think tells a lot. I think it's interesting that conservatives tend to have female leaders, and what does that tell us about what we need to disrupt in the patterns there as well? But I am beginning to wonder whether there's almost like a cage around certain women as well within the world, because actually the ceiling is one element, but it's almost like some women are being surrounded by it. So when I think of disruption, it's also disrupting that feeling of entrapment based on the legacies that are around, which is a very big start to our conversation. But I think what this book has enabled, because I've shared it with lots of my colleagues, actually, is almost like their minds have been blown with it, that actually there are women who are existing within these experiences and sharing them. And therefore, there's almost like a light to work towards because we're not alone in it. So I don't know who would like to start based on which of these chapters or which area of the book do you feel would enable you to disrupt and why? That's a big question, I know, but Vivian will know that I tend to ask the big questions to really get into it.
So I'm happy to kick off. That's okay. So I see it from a perspective, from not being a teacher and what I've seen across Parliament. And if I can just I think when I immediately think of disruption, I think of the suffragettes, tying themselves to the railings and things like that. And if I'm honest, that doesn't sit with me at all. I'm not saying what they did was wrong or right, but for me, what really came out of this disruptive is, we've been living with these systemic issues about women for centuries, haven't we? Although I believe there's a period in history before people settled that there were some really great women out there who were talked about, and somehow we've lost that, but that's another subject. I think what this does for me is tells of real life experience that people have tried to overcome the issues. I think Ruth in particular talks about what she did is created a flexible website, and she didn't need to go through an act of parliament, or anything to get there. It was something that appeared so simple that was so powerful. And I think that is the hope that this book gives me is, yes, we don't have to wait another 100,000 years. We can find these nuggets that actually, as individuals, we can do, or collectively, and break through. That for me was kind of the real message of hope that came through for me.
Oh, that's really good to hear, isn't it? And it's fabulous you were mentioning Ruth, because she, alongside Bianca Greenhall, led a WomenED event in Brighton 2 weeks ago, and she was talking about her chapter there and what she'd done. And I said to her afterwards, are you going to spread this around your region now then? And that hadn't occurred to her. She'd focused on the women in her school and support for flexible working, but it's now straightforward for her to share that across other schools because she works in a local authority region that would support that. And the local authority leader was there at the event as well.
Wow.
So those connections, as well as those disruptions, can really make a difference. And in WomenED, we talk about challenge in three ways. We challenge individuals to see exactly as you said, Ginny, what you can do. We challenge the organisations for how they need to change to enable this. And then we challenge the system. And some of the actions are quick and easy and practical, pragmatic.
Yeah.
Some are much bigger and ethical. And it's about picking the ones, as you said, Ginny, that you can make a difference with. And lots and lots and lots of small actions build up to an enormous wave of change. And it's just about being that 10% braver, that one step forward, isn't it?
Yeah.
Emma, do you want to share your
Yeah,
thoughts?
I think, as I say, like flexible working, I think is a really, as something that I'm currently enjoying the benefits of. I think it's a really important one for me. I think what I found really interesting is, although I always knew I was going to go back to work early, and my husband's sort of taking shared parental at home, I think I'd never even considered the idea of flexible working. And actually that fact that it was pitched to me is actually, if that's something we can make work for you. But even when it had been suggested to me by my headmaster, I still almost like then tried to find the easiest way to make it work in the timetable to make it accepted. Like I almost still didn't believe that when I put in the application, it would be a yes. Even when it was almost like this thing of like, I've answered every possible criticism you could have. I think we still have that where we expect the answer to be no, and we put so much more work in to kind of counter for everything, rather than actually just that assumption that like this should be considered. I think, yes, these days we kind of have a legal right to it, but I think we still expect the answer to be, well, I've considered it, but no. And I found that was a really interesting one for me, was actually kind of trying to manage that almost anxiety about even applying for it, and it being like, well, I'm not sacrificing my role, but I'm also trying to put, like work on that work-life balance, which I think as teachers we always really find quite hard to do. And particularly as women, when you have a family, I think comes that extra layer.
Almost like you were anxious about disrupting the narrative that's already there. Like, were you fearful of judgment, and were you fearful of the fact that people might sort of question your ability to do your role and things like that?
Definitely. I think there's particularly when you sort of get into sort of the middle management, senior leadership, it's almost like, well, if you're not present, if something goes wrong, who's going to handle it? And it's almost like you're failing at your role when you're not there. And so I think there's that, and actually almost having to let go of it and be like, the world is not going to fall apart because I'm not there for one afternoon. And sort of battling that. I think the other one I found really interesting coming back early from maternity leave is when that was kind of, and that was my story from very early on, everyone being like, well, you'll change your mind. Everything was the assumption that like, well, you'll change your mind, you'll get to 4 months, and like no one will, you won't want to do that, and we'll prepare for you to actually change your mind and turn around and say no, rather than actually kind of trusting me as the owner of my body and my life to kind of have made those decisions. I think that was a really interesting thing. Even now, I've noticed the narrative changes in my conversations in the school, because it's, as much as I love talking to my baby, I love him obviously, but every conversation started these days is often, how is your baby, rather than anything else. Because like I am now known almost around school as the person who has the young baby at home who's gone back to work. It's really interesting how that challenging of a social norm, which for us was a really natural thing to do in our household, there's still a lot of people who kind of can't understand how we've made that choice.
It's really interesting, really interesting. I think it's the fact that because it's always been the done thick, and you're disrupting that norm in the sense, it's almost like, how are people perceiving you, and also how I think it makes them uncomfortable. And I think that's always an issue with women, when we are wary about making other people feel uncomfortable. But to be disruptive, you need to cause discomfort in others as well as yourself. So the fact that you've sort of shared that you were uncomfortable about going through it with the anxiety and things like that, and then you have got that perception coming through to you that they're a bit uncomfortable about your choices that you're making, and almost trying to define your narrative for you. That's really interesting as well.
And I think you've done that in your chapter as well, Karen, in the book. Definitely, because there are a lot of prejudicial ideas around Barbie and that what that character stands for. And I remember the first time I was reading your draft of the chapter, and I could feel in myself, I was thinking, well, yeah, but Barbie is something I would never have ordinarily been interested in. But you linked it to all those stereotypes that Emma was just alluding to, and how it could help, the film could certainly help overcome some of those stereotypes. And so we can be disruptive in small ways and disruptive in large ways. And it's whether that feeling of being uncomfortable in challenging the experience we have, if we can't overcome that, nothing's ever going to change. So then it's about how you disrupt, isn't it? It's not just what you disrupt, it's how you disrupt in that way. And one of the chapter authors was spoke at the Southeast event recently, and she put forward a really good idea. She was talking about the gender pay gap, but she said you don't have to be aggressive. You do have to be assertive, but you can do that simply by asking lots of why questions. And the title of her chapter is Why Isn't My Gender Pay Gap Improving?
I think that's to be curious about something, I think is a really good way to get into things. But what I realize about stereotypes is that they do make people feel safe. And so it's almost like because that's the way it's done, and we don't want to, but I think what it's also doing is creating the safer spaces for certain types of, I don't want to gender it, but certain types of people and leaders to use the systems there to work to their advantage. And I think one of the things that I think comes through really strongly throughout the whole book is knowing what to disrupt as well, because I think unless you're aware of it and unless you unmask it, and there's so much inequity within education that I'm seeing quite readily in lots of different ways, that as a younger teacher, I wouldn't have seen that. But I think we all have that instinct that certain things aren't right, and that there's always something that you're having to push past. And I think with my chapter, definitely it's very much that the legacy I want to make sure is built is that the younger girls within our systems, because they are growing up in these systems, know what they are and know it's okay to question them. And you can't do that unless you're given a voice to do it. And I think using Barbie in the way that it was intended to was that a woman has choices. That is what Barbie is that you have choices. Unless young girls understand that, I don't think they're ever going to understand how to navigate the inequities around them. Stereotypes make people feel safe because it's what's already been done and they know how to use the system. Ginny, I don't know if you wanted to come in there.
Yeah, so excuse me. It goes back a little bit slightly. So I think the other thing that really stood out to me about the flexible working of how the fabulous way that's been linked to the big issue about retention and losing, teachers, particularly in that age group of, sorry, I might be wrong, about 30 to 39, how actually the benefit of this, it can address. And I think that particular should appeal to the leadership if they can't get and really want, flexible working. And I think probably there are people who really still believe that. If you can give them something that'll help solve them a really big issue that's impacting them, and indirectly you can benefit them, I think that's such a fabulous way of positioning it.
And I do actually think there is some hope with this current government, in the sense that the Secretary of State has taken up the cudgels for some of these key big ideas because they are related to retention. We have to be pragmatic. We have to have an important outcome to this, as well as how we feel as women. It's always working that 3 level, us, our organisations and the system. And we just have to hope and keep pushing that some of the recommendations she's made now to the School Teachers Review Board will actually tackle a lot of the inequitable practices that are happening in our schools and universities and colleges.
Was there a specific case study that you want to discuss a bit more then that really spoke to you in terms of what you're saying?
Well, you know which section I would always want to highlight, which is the gender pay gap. Because I wouldn't describe that as inequitable. I'd describe it as shocking and a stain on education that we have such an enormous gender pay gap. We're coming up to November the 24th, which is Equal Pay Day in England. And what that means is, after November the 24th, compared to all men, all women are working for free because of the gender pay gap. And actually, because education has one of the highest gender pay gaps in all sectors, then probably if there was an equal pay day in education, we'd be back in August or something like that. So how would you all like to work for a whole term for nothing in comparison to your male colleagues? You see, I think it's a stain on education that happens to a lot of women. And I think it's about knowledge of that first. And in the book, there are several great chapters about how people have attacked the gender pay gap in their own organisation. So the question, why isn't my gender pay gap improving, is answered in terms of ways in which we can do that. And I was speaking to head teachers in a local authority in the southeast this week, and I'd been working with them last year as well. And the local authority proudly said, we've removed the current salary question from our application forms, which is a tiny pragmatic action. And I asked the leader of the local authority, I said, how long did that action take you? And he said 5 minutes.
Wow.
Because it's online, so they just had to remove that box. And we can make a huge difference eventually, maybe for the next generation at least, by doing very small pragmatic points, but also taking the big decisions. And I think the book is a really powerful combination of both of those. So I would recommend the gender pay gap section, because people have made real strides in there. But I also edited the flexible working one, so I'm totally with you, Emma. There's some amazing chapters in there as well. And I always say to every woman, give one of our books, and I would definitely say this one, to every male head teacher in the world, because they are the ones that also have to know about the disruptions they can make. And we're very proud that there's a lot of male head teachers who are now, especially around flexible working, really making those disruptive actions in their organisations. And yes, Ginny, it's because they want to retain people, but I don't mind why. We just need it to happen.
Yeah.
Ginny, Emma, so are there any, so because we've got 8 minutes left of the chat now, so which of the like specific chapters or specific case studies have really sort of hooked you in?
I don't know. So I'll confess, I'm still getting my way through the book as sort of my nighttime reading once the little one's gone to bed. I think one of the early chapters that really spoke to me was about the building the sort of professional learning networks. As someone who I feel at the moment really benefits from having some colleagues that I can kind of rely on to discuss my experiences, and sort of kind of almost use as a sounding block for my own self-confidence. I think a lot of the time, a lot of the time as women, we know what we need to do in a situation, but we need someone else's approval to do it. And it's kind of overcoming that for me. I'm still working on, and we're currently trying to set up within our school a more formal professional network for women, because we recognise we're benefiting from having a small group that can have these informal dialogues about actually how many other leaders, individuals in our school actually could benefit from that. And we're kind of in the process of starting that up, fingers crossed. And so I think sort of that really speaking about professional learning networks and making me think about actually what can we build, how can we kind of, and also just like, I guess, who's out there. I think I often get quite close knit of like, this is my school community at this particular time, these are the people, but actually looking maybe outside of my school to, our local authority, our collection of schools, WomenED as a group, and kind of maybe trying to push myself out there a bit beyond. I think the bit that really stuck last night was that idea of it doesn't all have to be face to face. And I think the idea, I'm even further back on the social media journey than you are, I think, Ginny. I just launched LinkedIn this summer, actually going, I actually could maybe post something on there and actually use it as this force for good, rather than just kind of being this silent person in the background, taking it all in and actually starting to use my own voice.
You need to, because I think that's the whole point of WomenED. I think for me, I definitely realised I had a voice. I've been part of WomenED for 7 years now, which is the longest commitment I've ever made to anything, to be fair, that says a lot. But it's because of the fact that you have a community of, I want to say humans. I think but we're humans first of all, and that's how you connect with each other. And I think you're seen and your voice is valued and acknowledged within this community, and that gives you so much confidence to sort of use it to help others as well. So yeah, definitely. And you've got a really great voice to be sharing, Emma. Really great voice.
Thanks.
Ginny, how about?
Can I just, because I'm on taxi duty on a Saturday at this time on a Saturday, so I'm going to have to leave. But that point about voice is really important, because it's why we wrote the books, because our voices are on social media, but there are so many women who are not on social media, and so they're not aware of these issues, and that's the whole point of the books. So if you've got a friend who's not on social media, she probably doesn't know any of this. So the books are a great way to share that. And thanks ever so much for reading it and talking about it. And Karen, thanks for everything you've done with this. And really wish I could finish, but I can see the family outside waiting for the taxi.
Yeah.
Thanks ever so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you for your support. Thank you. See you soon. Thank you.
Bye.
Ginny, do you want to? I think it'd be what part of the book or specific part of the book do you think it really?
So really interesting. Can I just take a minute just to reach out to Emma? Emma, I'm sure you've got lots of support in terms of starting out on social media, but if you just want to have somebody else who's been on that journey, absolutely horrified is the word that I had, then I'm more than happy. Find me on LinkedIn, Virginia Hitch. I'm happy to have an initial conversation and support you through that.
Amazing, thank you.
So you're very welcome. So actually for me, maybe it was because it's one of the last but the piece that was written about menopause and perimenopause, I think, because the sheer honesty and the vulnerability that the person writing that book about how the stories are, how she went into a classroom and she never knew from one moment how she would kind of deal with the symptoms coming up, and how she couldn't exit the classroom when she had, those terrible hot flushes and everything. And I thought, wow, my generation, we didn't talk about that, and I was lucky. It didn't really impact me too much, but my heart went out to her, and the very simple statement that they said really resonated for me. And I wrote this down, and that we need to recognise this is a perfectly normal stage of women's life. And we don't. It's so much not, isn't it? And how
A
we
lot of
can get
stigma with
to
it,
that
yeah.
place. It is absolutely, we don't talk about it. So that was the thing that really, yeah, I was quite overcome when I read those stories.
Yeah, I think you've sort of highlighted the power of WomenED in the sense of it's a safe space to share your vulnerabilities, which can only ever, firstly, educate others, but make them feel that they're not alone in these things as well, because it's only now within my career that we're looking at menopause policies and things like that, and it's from a trust level, the trust that I'm at now, where the CEO, who is a white cisgender man, is talking about menopause policy, and I think in some ways we've come a long way. But I think that's one example of the fact that they are looking at it seriously and seeing it as just as important as any other issue within education or school. But it's that I think it's actually opening up and sharing these stories, because if we don't, I think that's the issue, that these cycles keep repeating themselves and women find themselves in the same situation as others did. But because no one spoke about it, they don't know where to go.
Mm.
And I think, yeah, with WomenED, it's that sort of community that you share, and with sharing comes that connection as well. Just trying to find the quote that Lisa Hannay put. So I think what you've both said is really, it touches on this. So Lisa started the introduction. As authors of our destiny, every decision is a sentence, every action a paragraph, and every dream is a chapter waiting to be written. So write and be 10% braver. I think that's it, isn't it? That we need to take ownership of our narratives. And
Yeah.
that will, yeah. Ladies, have you got any final thoughts that you want to add to the chat before? We've got less than a minute, so be quick.
I've not read the stories of women being 10%. I've read so I think I'm going to go away and read that one, because I love storytelling. It really, brings it all alive, doesn't it, in a way, in a voice that people understand.
Let's connect. Emma?
I just think I thank you for letting me take part in this. I think this is a real big step in me being 10% braver, just taking part in this book club. And I think when I joined this, I kind of hoped I'd probably be able to sort of sit in the back, listen to people who have